This one, prepare it for Veronica like that. Okay, but I will leave it as sample way out. Yeah, this one is already working. Should I turn it off now? Yeah. This one is on. This
All hear me? Yes, perfect. Well, hi everyone, and then welcome to our event, the Open Source Driving the European Digital Decade. My name is Axel Tivney. I'm a policy research analyst at Open Forum Europe, and we are very happy and excited to have all of you here in Brno today, and all of you participating online, joining us for this event. Before we do anything else, let's just cover some basic housekeeping. There are some restrooms when you go along the corridor after the first doors and the second ones. We have quite a packed program today, as you already know. And just a short reminder, we'll have a coffee break from 11:15 to 11:45. The coffee break will happen in the courtyard. And just an FYI, you've probably been told, and I don't want to repeat that too much, but please don't bring any coffee or teacup here for the sake of the room. That would be very nice. Thank you for that. Also, I would like to point out this afternoon's expert panel discussion, which takes place after lunch, will be for in-person participants only. For those of you attending online, if you have any questions or comments, please write it in the chat, and the Open Forum Europe team will bring to the attention of the moderator, and we will try to incorporate them if there is time. So, the think tank I work for, Open Forum Europe, or OFE in short, is a Brussels-based think tank, and we are at the intersection of open technologies and public policy. But today we're not alone in hosting the event, and I would like to introduce my co-organizer today. I'll start with Lucia Smolka, chairperson of the Committee of Open Cities.
Thank you, Axel. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lucia Smolka, and I'm a leader of co-organizing Open Cities and Open Planet. So we started running this event many months ago in a very modest format, and it evolved into a combination of several events over 4 days together with Open L conference, yesterday was Open Day, and counting was today. I'm incredibly grateful for the organizations and individuals who came together to make this event happen. Finding a common base is easy because we care greatly about open source and about gospel, so that's a crucial thing for us. Today, we are here to discuss highest policy goals that could be achieved with open source, as well as the perception of openness in shaping the future of Czech open source program office. Also, we would like to discuss all the necessary steps and its creation and the first things we have to do. So I hope you will enjoy today's conference and you will take away a lot of ideas and inspiration. Thank you.
Please welcome now Barbara Ginova, Vice Dean for Industrial Relations at the Faculty of Informatics at Madarik University. And again, thank you for hosting this event today.
Thank you very much for actually bringing that event to our faculty. We are really happy to be the one who can provide the ground for such an event. The Faculty of Informatics, where we are, is actually the Faculty of Informatics was the first one in the Czech Republic, like independent faculty of computer science. And also, like, this room is very nice in terms of the theme of the event today. Like, you can see the written like Czech Cybercrime Center of Excellence, because like here in this facility we typically have cybercrime exercises, these capture flag, where different teams actually try to experience that kind of protection of a critical infrastructure, which can be a nuclear power plant, and other teams are attacking it. Like living that experience, because we believe that for our protected society in the future, thinking about how we can safeguard digitalization is crucial, and that's one of the key things that the faculty is trying to do. I'm very happy that also this event is brought here because many different, I would say, stakeholders that care about our protected and digitalized future are meeting together. That's one of the things that university has always been striving for, to actually be interconnecting those different sectors and stakeholders who care about the same theme. And I really like the open source theme of the event. Also, as a faculty, we strive for open science, really doing these really like progressing these fields together in an open way so that others can build on it and we can do these things together. Thank you very much for coming. Have a great day. I will be around during the day. I will definitely be around during the coffee breaks. Please just catch me whenever you see me. I'll be really happy to chat to tell you more about what is happening here. And enjoy your day. Thank you.
And finally, I would like to introduce Mr. Ludek Schmid, Director of Product Engineering at Red Hat.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your day and expand your horizons and go with fresh ideas and new viewpoints. Here I would like to talk a little bit about Red Hat, which I represent, but I'm not the Red Hat in the room. Just raise your hands from Red Hat. So those are the guys super passionate about open source communities. We do that at a global level. Red Hat is the world's leader of open source, and we do a lot to help our customers to deploy open source powered solutions in the hybrid cloud. That's a corporate punchline, but like that expands to way more here in the broader region. I'm super proud to be actually a member of the biggest engineering office Red Hat has, which is located in this very city, counting 1,500 engineers. And like all those people are passionate not just about open source, but also about communities that actually are the key element of the open source movement. And we all know that this goes beyond just software. We have great programs, cooperation with universities. We run for more than a decade cooperations with both technical universities here that extended to the rest of Czech Republic, and I would say rest of the world eventually. We help other educational initiatives like Chiquitas. We help teaching software and STEM at high schools. We help charities. We do a lot. So if you see Red Hat over here, just discuss whatever's on your heart. We know open source up and down, from the upside down, and really enjoy the today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ludek. We're also very excited that today's event is hosted under the auspices of the Czech presidency of the Council. I would like to thank them again for this as well. This presidency is taking place during a particularly interesting time for, as the Czech presidency has already shown, its will to push further the current debates at EU level on digital policies. In the past few years, we have seen an increased strategic focus in open source and open technologies from the presidencies. And we are happy to see that the Czech government is taking this to the next level. Today, we will hear from several interesting speakers who are working on topics right at the cutting edge of public open source policy in Europe. First up, we'll have Mr. Ivan Bartoš, Minister of Digitization of the Czech Republic, who will participate with the recorded video.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, topic is to me. Open source and its principles are key to modern, transparent, and innovative operation. gentlemen and dear colleagues.
Well, I would like to thank Mr. Bartosz for his message and his participation in the event. Oh, this is off. Oh. I now would like to welcome our second speaker. Please all welcome Mrs. Veronika Gaffi to Brno. We are very delighted to have you here with us to participate in this event, but also and enjoy for yourself how incredible and important Brno is for this ecosystem. By introduction, Mrs. Gaffi is the third university arrived here at DigiJet, the European Commission. Perhaps useful to explain is to the audience that DigiJet is in many ways an IT ministry equivalent with the Commission responsible for providing IT solutions to 35,000 officials. And over the past 20 years, being anti-green drive the adoption of open technology and culture with the Commission and provide a centralized collaborative hub for member states who also share, reuse and create the next generation of digital development using open source and open data. Mrs. Gaffi, please, the floor is yours.
Governor,
Member
Member of the European Parliament,
representatives of the city of Brno and
Mazar
University. Thank you for the opportunity to address this conference. And
hello and good morning as well to all colleagues from across the EU services
who joined us
in person and online.
I'm very happy to have this opportunity to discuss the achievements and challenges on our open source journey. For me, it's been a very short journey so far because I'm only 6 months in my time. But of course, the real drivers of open source in my organization are Miguel and Klaes sitting over there. So if you want to know the real experts, talk to them. I'm responsible for the Polytest. But no, Miguel and Klaes came to me very in my time in DigiJet to sponsor open source events, to sponsor hackathons. And then I wanted to know more about what was happening in the organization. I said, I got embarrassed because I said, I will have a deep dive into the different areas of DigiJet. In fact, it was the open source colleagues who were the first who came to me for a deep dive. I'm a bit embarrassed calling it a deep dive because with my level of expertise, it's more sticking a toe in the water. But this conference emphasizes the importance of free and open source, our digital decade, in the infrastructure of European public services, for our technological sovereignty and digital commons, and global strategic economic relevance. I have learned, and I've heard it last night and this morning, that there are Czech software developers involved in nearly all of the major open source projects. So Czech high-tech engineers have over the past 20 years created world-leading free and open source projects. There's a wide range of projects by CZ-NIC. Its successes include the Terrace and Terrace on-the-air network routes used by consumers in the Czech Republic and several EU member states. And I was really impressed with this one, BIRD, the routing daemon. In 2015, it was used by 2 out of 3 internet exchange points across the world. We checked with CZ-NIC last week, and they showed us that BIRD is now involved in routing 85% of network traffic in internet exchange points worldwide. It is very impressive. It shows how indispensable open source is for running the internet, and by itself, it already proves the relevance of open source for digital government. Other Czech open source inventors are busy changing manufacturing across the globe. The i3,
Josef Prusa's 3D printer was, and perhaps still is, the world's most used 3D printer. The buzz of free and open source innovation is probably why Red Hat chose the Czech Republic and the city of Brno for its research and development arm, where it now employs, I have a figure 2,000, I heard another figure 1,500, so it must be someplace in between, open source engineers. I pick these examples because they link open source software to computer hardware. Hardware, especially computer chips, are strategic assets. And here, as in software, open source hardware is essential for digital sovereignty. And this brings me to the CHIPS Act, which was announced by the Commission earlier this year, to create a state-of-the-art European chip ecosystem. And with a target in 8 years from now that the EU will produce 20% of the world's chips. This is why the Commission is investing in projects working on open processor architectures such as RISC-V. The global growing importance of open source software and hardware is reflected in my own organization, DIGIT, or its formal name, the Directorate General for Informatics. Open source is dominant in our data center. 75% of our servers run Linux. We use Drupal for all Commission websites, and our internal software development tool chain increasingly relies on open source. Over the past 2 decades, the use of open source has expanded from the data center to our desktops, to the web, and our smartphone apps. And really, when you see the journey that we have all made in our working lives over the last 20 years, it's quite extraordinary. And in fact, much that also facilitated our being able to continue to work and function effectively over the COVID crisis, when we changed the way we all worked. It's not just DIGIT. Almost all of the sample software shared by the Digital Europe program is open source. And hotspots of open source activity in the Commission include directorates general, such as the Joint Research Centre and Eurostat. And open source is becoming the norm in Commission projects. I point to the Next Generation Internet Funding Framework, funding hundreds of grassroots open source projects, and to the Cloud Middleware Project, Simple, where open source is a requirement. The progression reflects our growing maturity from an organization that consumes open source to one that builds its own solutions on open source, to ultimately a Commission that is closely involved in open source. That's why in 2021, we elevated our own internal open source strategy and made it a Commission-wide strategy. And we created a dedicated team, the Commission Open Source Programme Office, or OSPO, to make it easier to use and share open source and to assist colleagues to build open source into their projects and ensure a focus on IT security, which, let's face it, for the last 6 months has never been far from our hearts. I have a few minutes left, and it gives me a little time to mention our work with member states. There is an upcoming Interoperable Europe Act, a proposal which has been co-designed with member states, and this cooperation framework supports the digital transformation of our public sector and acknowledges the importance of open source. The Act draws on 2 decades of knowledge aggregated by the Open Source Observatory, a hub of information on the development of use of open source in EU public services, encouraging collaboration. And the idea in our interoperability actions is that we will pull together the member states, and the member states are asking for this, in order that we can identify what works, what's successful, and have that freely and openly available to all. In the Digital Europe programme, we are funding more and more open source initiatives, including flagship projects like Leos, which is the editor for drafting legal documents, which will be interinstitutional and will involve also the Council and the European Parliament. To our colleagues in the member states who are taking steps to increase their use of free and open source, to all of the enthusiasts, advocates, and community members, it will take dedication and time to become a mature part of the community, but we are taking incremental steps all the time to build and strengthen the support for free and open source. I'm pleased to announce today one such step. In December last year, we got rid of an outdated and complicated bureaucratic legal process that stopped us sharing open source. Now, Commission projects that wish to share their software with others are free to do so. We created a central code repository, one which I can now announce publicly. You will find our software development platform at code.europa.eu. So code.europa.eu facilitates the open development of software projects from the Commission as well as the other European Union institutions. We start today with just over 100 projects and 150 developers, but the OSPO is busily onboarding others. All these projects are open to software developers interested in reusing, adapting, and helping to extend and improve the software. Running on an open source solution in a data center in the EU, code.europa.eu facilitates co-development and sharing and reuse of European public service solutions. It reinforces similar efforts of public services in Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and elsewhere in the EU. And we think more and more countries will become active in the near future. And ultimately, it is a practical incremental step towards achieving digital sovereignty. I'm really impressed by the achievements of open source in the Czech Republic, and likewise encouraged by the progress made in the European Commission. It underscores the strategic, economic, and global strategic value of this work. But I'm also aware of how much work there is ahead. I think we've come a long way in 20 years, but I think we need to be quite ambitious in the years ahead. But I close by confirming my commitment and that of Digit to further open source and its contributions to a technologically open and therefore sovereign and interoperable Europe. So thank you all very much, and I wish you all a really interesting day. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Gaffey, for this very interesting keynote. We are very grateful that you have chosen today's event to express the Commission's position and its project on such an important topic as open source within the digital decade. I'm delighted now to turn to our fireside chat between two well-versed computer scientists and politicians. It is a somewhat rare and important combination. And the French ambassador for digital affairs behind the European Digital Commons Initiative. Our three speakers will discuss the political goals that can be achieved through open source with the moderation of James Lovegrove from Red Hat. Please welcome them on stage. And
hello. Wonderful. It's working. Yes, morning, everyone. Actually, sorry to disappoint, but there will be not three people physically here. There will be myself, Henri Verdier, who's joining remotely, and Marcel Collaja is en route. So I'm going to, on the fly, reshuffle things. But before we get started, how are we doing for the sound check? Is everything okay? You hear good? Also online, all clear? I'm going to assume that's a yes, otherwise there'd be lots of chatter. Very good. Well, what I will do is I'm going to introduce our speakers and then going to hand over to them as they are available. And as I explained, I think we will slightly reshuffle the order. The point of this fireside chat, albeit absent a fire, is to look at how open source is driving the digital decade. So we have three well-versed, prominent open source champions and also policy leaders to help us understand better what that looks like. I will introduce Marcel when he joins. I'm going to also introduce Henri. Mr. Profond, if you'd like to join me up here, I'll also introduce you. And then we can get started. Now, in the good old-fashioned open source way, if you think my questions are not up to par, then jump in and better those questions. That's absolutely fine. I will do my best not to disappoint. So Henri Verdier is a digital ambassador with France's Ministry of European Foreign Affairs. He's the former state CIO and a passionate entrepreneur who continues to innovate in government and partnerships beyond France in multiple countries around the world. André Profond, just sitting here to my right, is the advisor to the Vice Minister who we were listening to earlier, Mr. Bartosz, of digitization for the Czech government, and actively supporting the new Czechia Digital Agency, otherwise known as DIA, if I'm not mistaken. DIA, right. A highly regarded computer scientist and member of the open source community, and as he whispered in my ear, also an avid user of Fedora. Is that right? Very good, super. Okay, and I tell you what, just for the sake of I'm hoping, being the eternal optimist, that Marcel will make it. He is really en route. He's a member of the European Parliament. Again, a computer scientist, indeed an alum, another great alum from this esteemed university. He has also several years with Red Hat just up the road, and he was recently elected, or 3 years ago, elected as an MEP for the Pirate Party, involved in all sorts of policies impacting this digital decade, but also a senior MEP as a questor. He's also responsible for the daily IT operations. So again, with regards to what Mrs. Gaffey was discussing and mentioned, this intra-EU collaboration and cooperation, and it would be interesting to hear a little bit about that from his side. Leos, I think, was one of the projects which was mentioned, but there are others. So Ambassador Verdier, you are there, you can hear me? All good, fine, super. So Ambassador, I'd like to turn to you to talk about recent work that you've been working very hard with your colleagues in France during the EU presidency, and this was the Declaration of Digital Commons. It seeks, of course, to build on open source as a global commons, but of course, it's much broader than that. And I think it would be interesting, just as a context setter, for you to perhaps just elaborate a little bit more on that initiative, the steps you're taking, and also how, again, as Mrs. Gaffey mentioned earlier, how we can engage better with the community, both here in Brno, but far, far beyond as well. So over to you, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very sad not to be physically with you in Brno. The week before the UNGA is not the best week to travel because I do organize 2 events in New York next week. To make it simple and to start the exchange, first, I would love to share with you my conviction that the digital revolution as we know it is a revolution of open standards, open source software, free software, and open data. And the stream of innovation and creativity and economic growth and citizen empowerment that we know for 50 years is because of this open approach, decentralized, etc. That's one thing. The second thing is that we, Europeans, we didn't pay enough attention about the fact that this is a very European vision of the world, and that a large part of this movement was born in Europe. If you consider clearly, seriously, the first works that I did conduce to TCP/IP were French. HTML was invented by an Englishman in Geneva. Linux is European, Bluetooth is European, ADSL is European, and a lot of other very important free open resources. And we in France, we think more and more than we have to stand for this legacy and maybe protect it a bit, because we do observe a movement of weaponization of internet, of some states that want to control it more and more. Big monopolies built on internet that try to control a bit or to capture a bit. And we consider that Europe has to protect it, to continue this movement of economic innovation and growth, and this movement of citizen empowerment. And that may be the role of Europe. The new thing is that, as you all see, we have now for a few years this reflection, this very important reflection about European digital sovereignty. And France, we try to prove that an open source approach can be part of a digital sovereignty strategy. To make it very simple, the more you have free resources, the more you have open source software, the more you build your countries or your economy on digital commons. I introduced the word then. The freer you are, because no one can expropriate you, nor change the prices, nor impose you technological choices. So we consider that this is an important part of digital sovereignty strategy. That's also why we did introduce in the debate the word commons, because we know, and everyone in the room knows that sometimes you can have a predatory strategy, if I may, a capture strategy through open source. Open source alone is not enough. If I open the source of my code, but I control the commit, I'm still the master of the ecosystem, and I can control the ecosystem. So when we speak about commons, it can be a bit more like than just software. It can be open standards, or it can be open data. So it can be a bit broader than just software. But not every open source software can be considered as commons. We want resources that are governed by the community of contributors with an open and shared governance. And last year, it was the French presidency of EU, and we did propose to our friends of Europe to launch a working group. And we actually, 18 countries did join the group very easily. That was a first surprise, because we had to align ministries of economy and finance and ministries of foreign affairs, which is not so easy in 18 countries. And we did collectively prepare these reports. You know this, and I hope that you can have a look to the report. And we are proposing a simple but very committed strategy to EU. So this year, and with our friends of Czech presidency, we'll try to promote the conclusion of the report. To make it simple, we suggest to start with very small and engaged policies, like open by default in the European administrations. We suggest to think about a one-stop shop, because what we did discover is that we have tons of commoners, creators, innovators, and dozens of tools to help them, but this is a total mess. And a one-stop shop to help people to find the good way to receive money or support can be very efficient. The third thing is to inject a bit, to give some money, because we, government, we always pretend to love the communities, but we don't pay enough. And maybe it's time to invest a bit. Here, I have to say that if we consider that commons are a tool for sovereignty, it's not just commons invented in Europe. Some very important piece of code are not European, but they are helpful for sovereignty. So we have to be a bit open there. And we do suggest that it's time to think about one European foundation, so a foundation born in Europe, because in this landscape, you have very few foundations. Most of them are Americans. We like them, we work with them, but maybe our voice and our vision of the world and our energy should contribute to this movement and to be part of the movement. I hope I didn't be too long, but that's why what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was enlightening. I think also it's important to make that very clear about not all open source can be considered as open source. And I think there's never been a more important time to make that clear in terms of getting the right governance, the right IP, using those recognized permissive and copyleft licensing. I think we should be on guard for those who might claim to have an open source distribution, but in fact it's not. And also on the point about foundations, of course, Gail in the audience here from the Eclipse, I think it's one such example of a foundation helping drive open source in Europe, but also equally beyond. So I'm going to turn to Mr. Profond, if I may. Again, great to have you by the proverbial fire. Warm your hands. Let's get a little bit warmer with a question to you about something which the Minister mentioned earlier about DIA and your own personal involvement in that, but also the agency itself. Of course, later on, we're going to be exploiting you again on another panel where we'll have Maria from the digital agency, the counterpart. So it'd be good to have a bit of a discussion on that panel about that. But really, sort of how do you see this agency adding value? How do you see it interacting with our other agencies, and really sort of driving this open source policy agenda, and to, as it's written, European Digital Decade to realize the European, or even accelerate that realization? Thank you, Mr. Profond. I'm going to give you the mic.
Thank you. Hello. Let me elaborate. In Czech Republic, organization of e-government is pretty big house right now, because now it is responsibility for Ministry of Interior, which is basically Ministry of Policemen, of course. And there is no concentrate focus on digital goals, because their goals are security, firefighters, policemen, not digitalization. So my minister goals is to bring the institution which brings a single responsibility principle. Or pretty small institution which has goal to digitalize Czech Republic, to do it in high quality, not just another officer's task, but goals of entire institution. We are very inspired by another Czech institution, NÚKIB, which is cybersecurity institution, which is here in Brno. Yeah. And only after the start of operation of Digital and Information Agency, the DIA, we can finally push our topics, our political topics and beliefs and goals into public sector reality. Without it, it's not quite possible, because you have these officers from the policemen, and they just, okay, they have some information system, they are running this operation, but there is no goals and enthusiasm and other needed things to achieve something bigger. One of the goals of DIA is international collaboration, and of course, one of the form of international collaboration is at open source. We are happy that the timing is right, and we can directly connect DIA with now founded Czech National OSPO, which is now starting here in Brno. We wish close cooperation between DIA and National OSPO, like the Minister said. Just yesterday was the first in-person meeting of EU OSPO. For me, this is the great way to connect across Europe efforts in open source, and I'm really like that I met a lot of new people like Maria and from Sweden and much more, that and we can together bring better quality open source in public sector. It's not about quality of open source itself, it's about how to join these two words, these two very different words. There are barrier of public procurements, there are barrier of culture and mentality, there are barrier of very high level lobbying of the big vendors, and we have to manage this in some things, in soft ways, in education, in upscaling people, some things in maybe hard way, and some things in budgeting. So what we do need? Open source has wide opportunities, but of course, a competition is high. So we need a central support from EU Commission, of course. But I think Veronica Gaffey knew it, that there are some barriers like the procurement that can be a little tricky in adaptation of open source. And in the future, we need to talk about public procurement, which, yeah, that's I say now. So that's my first look at the topic. That's why we are creating our agency, and that is how we look to brighter tomorrows.
Thank you very much. I didn't appreciate, was the first meeting of the EU OSPO yesterday? In person. Wow, so it's a big deal. And it's somewhat sort of poignant that it took place in Brno, which if I understand correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, it has, in terms of ratio, open source contributed to IT professional, I think it's the highest ratio in the world, or certainly one of the countries right at the top of that list. So somewhat appropriate. And then to your point about the EU support, I think that message has been fully understood and has been responded to in terms of this announcement about the code.europa.eu. So I think things are heading in the right direction. And I think this point finally on the sort of culture piece about inspiring and getting policemen and so on excited about open source, I suppose just their core comment, their core job.
They have another agenda and another culture. Yeah.
So again, later on, perhaps we talk about Maria, as I will call, the Swedish Police is a big user of open source on the front line, and I think that's probably the last point I want to make on this idea that it's not just about the code, right? Open source code. It's much wider and bigger about in terms of the culture, so that passion that's needed.
Code and processes. The processes are important part. The processes are the difference, because every big corporation is very rigid, and the state is very big corporation, and it's rigid, conservative, and it's hard to change internal processes, hard to change internal rules to be reasonable. But normal open source software do some reasonable things. What we need to do if you want to organize your calendar, you organize your calendar. It's no rocket science, but in the public sector, you can create some much more complicated things, right? And a lot of stoppers that stop your adaptation of pretty good software that you can really use in practice, but in some theory with consultation with lawyer, it can be much harder.
Can I make a two-finger comment? Very
yes,
brief.
I was just about to come because we were talking. You mentioned about. You mentioned something which triggered my mind, so I've got to bring in the ambassador on this. You talked about education and upscaling, so that's something I'd like to throw to the ambassador. But before doing so, ambassador, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Now, just to add something, first to congratulate you for this mission, which is one of the most amazing mission in a state. And I did contribute to this mission in France in my former position. And I want to add in your description that open source and commons are also communities, and communities that share a lot of values and goals with the government itself, because they are dedicated to general interest, and that you can build alliance with them. And in France, we made some very important projects of successes with the communities. For example, we did fix a very important issue of we did need one database, open source, of course, open data, of the geographical position of every postal addresses, which is very important for a lot of public services. And we did this with OpenStreetMap because the National Geographic Institute alone could not do this. And in France, we have the chance to have 1 million contributors to OpenStreetMap. So together we are very, very strong. And I wanted to say this, the perspective of the alliance between the state and the communities of commoners is very, very promising. So I did speak about this, so maybe I don't have time to speak about education. Let's decide, please.
I'm so sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you just repeat the last sentence?
No, I said I did use my time to speak about this alliance between communities. So if you want, I give you the floor back.
Do you know, I think Marcel, being the gentleman that he is, he's still en route. So I think we can use a bit of his time. I'm sure he'd be happy with that. So if you want to elaborate on that, and then also this point about empowering the citizen in because we talk a lot about default open policy.
Yes, that's another important thing.
Welcome, Marcel. So, Ambassador, maybe you want to just finish your comment, and then we'll bring Marcel into discussion. Thanks.
No, you did trigger me slightly about education. That's another important aspect, but I do observe that everywhere, everyone wants, of course, to digitalize the educational system. But very often we are just teaching new consumers. We teach to the students to use resources. And from my perspective, teaching to our children to be contributors, to be active. And I quote very often the famous quote, don't teach them to surf, teach them to make waves. That's very important for them as future citizens, but also for our global prosperity, because if we are not part of the creative movement, we'll be just followers. So and here, again, an alliance with the open source and commons communities can be very, very efficient.
Thank you, Ambassador. So welcome, Marcel. It's great to see you. I'm glad you're not, the beads of sweat have evaporated. You've been driving ferociously through Czech traffic, but welcome. I'm going to bring you straight in on a point which we were talking about earlier about commons and the interaction with interplay with open source and so forth. Actually, before I do so, it must feel a bit weird coming back here as a former student. I wondered whether when you were sitting here as a student, did you ever think one day I'll be sitting here as an MEP? Weird thought. So yes, no, I think your position as being one of the leading MEPs on this particular, I suppose, technology, but also deeper than just the code, the understanding. I would think you're quite unique in the Parliament with regards to that background, that expertise. So looking at it for your last 3 years in Parliament, and what's your sort of take on sort of Europe's political understanding of digital sovereignty and the extent to which open sources is really understood as being absolutely key to unlocking that digital decade, which we all talk about very often. And hand you the microphone. Welcome, good to see you.
Nice to see you too. Sorry for the late arrival, but yeah, highways in the Czech Republic. Yeah, not only as a student, even though when I studied here, this didn't really exist, but also seeing your Red Hat. Also worked at Red Hat before I got elected in the European Parliament. So quite a familiar environment for me. So on one hand, I would say that it is recognized that the potential of open source is enormous, and that you can see even in studies commissioned by the European Commission, where one of it says, when it speaks about the potential that a 10% increase in contributions to open source would generate up to 0.6% of the EU's GDP. Also, when you look at the digital decade targets set by the European Commission, then you will find that EU businesses and citizens should be empowered when using digital tools. And of course, who is best positioned, who else is best positioned than open source to actually empower citizens and businesses, because it really gives them the control over their data and over their technology. On the other hand, it is still difficult to somehow convince a majority of policymakers that you can achieve these goals by the transparency that free and open source software delivers and offers, rather than using closed proprietary solutions. And some resistance also comes from the history of ICT procurement contract frameworks that apparently prefer by design proprietary solutions and then slow down the change towards open source in ICT. So in my experience as an MEP, I was for 2.5 years Vice President of the European Parliament for ICT. I'm now the Quaestor of the European Parliament for ICT. I'm not going to dive into the details of the difference between the two roles, but as a bureau member focused on ICT, I see a lot into how ICT works in the European Parliament. And again, on one hand, it is politically acknowledged that open source software is valuable and should be deployed. And in many respects, you can see that applications developed internally are based on open source software. The backbone of the infrastructure often runs open source software, but then when it comes to some other systems, you still see the difficulty and hesitance, and some sort of resistance, I would even say, to use free and open source software. It is the case for technologies that you use every day, like email, but also when you look to the future, because there is a strategy to move to the cloud, and it looks like that the Parliament opts out for Microsoft and Amazon solutions, despite the weaknesses that these solutions entail for data management and for data protection, for basically being in control of the data. So there I would argue that hybrid cloud solutions that enable you to be more in control of your data are much better fit for institutions like that. So what can be done to improve it? So every MEP, every member of the European Parliament has the opportunity to initiate or to propose initiation of a so-called pilot project. What is a pilot project? Pilot project is a project with budget from the European Commission budget. And if that is approved by the European Parliament, then the European Commission has to actually run the project with the budget that was allocated to that. I have initiated a pilot project that I always forget the name, but it is free and open source software solutions for European public services, FOSSEPS. And it's run by the European Commission. Hello. And it consists in creating European open source application catalog. So basically, it tries to bridge the burden between free and open source projects and free and open source solutions and the administration that, well, many times would like to use them, but they don't actually really know what to do. And the number of different catalogs that are out there is, the way how this is set up, they are rather scattered. So it's good to bridge this gap with one catalog that basically bridges all of these catalogs that are out there together. And I have also recently proposed a pilot project to be again run by the European Commission, where the aim is to demonopolize the access to EU applications. So the EU institutions, they have a lot of applications that you can install on your phone, for instance, to make it easier for you to work with the institutions. But no wonder they are all available on the major Google Play and Apple App Store. The aim of this pilot project that I hopefully would be adopted is to make these applications available also on open source repositories like F-Droid, to also demonopolize the access to these applications. And I would also like to mention that recently the EDPS, the European Data Protection Supervisor, launched a project. It's called EU Voice and EU Video. And these are nothing else basically than instances of Mastodon and peer-to decentralized open source social networks. The project, I was told, would soon transition under the auspices of the European Commission, would be run as a permanent project by the European Commission. And I think this is a really great step, again, towards adopting free and open source software. So to wrap it up, on one hand, I would say quite some resistance that you can see, but also there are individual steps that are being done that are very promising for the future.
Thank you, Marcel. I appreciate we've got 5 minutes left. Am I right? Oh, we've got 10 minutes left. Thank you, man. Brilliant. Okay, so yes, I think maybe since it's a fireside chat, I'd like to perhaps put some petrol on the fire and talk about the sort of £800 gorilla in the room, this EU recovery fund. I think a couple of days ago, Commissioner van der Leyen was talking about how only 100 billion has been spent of 800 billion. And there was a growing rising sense of frustration in Brussels. I sense that that's possibly the case also at capital level, given that unfortunately our geopolitical and economic situation isn't getting any better. And yet this digital decade objective still remains. So I'd be interested in hearing your opinions, all three of you, on that discussion and how that's panning out. Probably I'll go to you, Mr. Profond, first, if I may. Thank you.
Oof, the recovery fund. In Czech Republic, we have a problem with recovery fund because our recovery plan was planned by the previous government, and now we have problem to change the project or change the criteria. Of course, we can change the project itself, but not the criteria. So if the criterion is something, sorry for the word, but stupid, like to buy a proprietary product, or it's not so easy, but in some way we cannot change it, and we are fighting with that. And of course, as I previously mentioned, we haven't the digital agency, so we have no our own quality workforce to refactor these projects. So we have a lot of projects, but a lot of are, for my point of view, ineffective investments in software model and current vendor lock-ins. It's really hard to change it in the real operation, and of course we need a lot of this project. There are some e-health projects, for example, but there are no and in Czech Republic there are no open source infrastructure in health or data exchange standards in health. We are working on data exchange standards, but they will come after this project. So it's really not. I'm not really optimistic about the results. Of course, we do a lot of things. We prepare, we can buy some hardware, we can improve some softwares, but there will be no open source revolution for the from the recovery plan. Yeah. One positive things is that we have in our recovery plan center of competence that where we can hire experts and share experts across the public sector. So we have a center like this we will have in DEA one and another in health or in the Ministry of Health. So there are, of course, some positive aspects, but it's quite bureaucratic and it's not easy for the starting government to change all the decisions made by previous government.
Thank you. If I may just pass that question to you, Ambassador Verdier, speak to us from Paris. Over to you, thanks.
So regarding the recovery plan.
Yes.
Okay, I can say two things because there might be two parts. Regarding the economic recovery, we don't have a specific open source approach because here we are trying to help small businesses and small companies, and they have the freedom of strategy. We hope that they know, because in France we are trying to rebuild the tech ecosystem for decades. So we know that they have a good level of strategic vision. Regarding the state, it's a bit different because we inject also a lot of money in the governmental infrastructure. And here we have quite open source by default policy, because we do encourage a lot to buy or to observe or to first to be able to notify why you didn't decide to build on open source. And I mentioned it on the other side, we have the other open source by default approach. Everything that the government build has to be open source. So we share all of our codes too. And that can be interesting too for the communities. So we can expect that the recovery plan will, in the governmental part, will be helpful for this vision.
Thank you. That was enlightening. So I'm going to hand over to Marcel. In fact, this is going to be the last intervention. And then if I could ask all three speakers to perhaps just consolidate a statement on this particular sort of high-level discussion theme, which I think we would appreciate as a takeaway from this fireside. So Marcel, floor's yours.
On the same question. Yeah, so I haven't looked too much into the particular implementation of the recovery fund in the Czech Republic. Nevertheless, the important thing is that there is a share that needs to be used for digitization. That's good. The problem is, of course, how we actually implement it. And then, of course, member states have the opportunity to use it well, but they can also use it in a wrong way. So I'm coming back a bit to what Andrzej said. So my take from that is that I would prefer that already on the high level definition that comes from the European level, we would already have incentives that would incentivize the use of free and open source software and preference for open source solutions, because we also know that they are valuable for our society because they can be reused, they can be recycled. People can collaborate on that, companies can collaborate on that. By definition, the data that it produces are open data and so on. So that, I think, is a missing piece that could have been done better. But as I said in the very beginning of my speech, we really still have room for improvements to actually convince policymakers how important the stress on free and open source solutions is.
Thank you. So sort of final few minutes of this fireside chat. Ambassador, you want to kick us off, and then we'll go in this direction and finish with Marcel at the end. Thank you.
Yes, I was wondering, so I want to share with you views. I may not make only friends, but I think that this is very important. Sometimes there is like a confusion because when you think about open source, you think about one very important economic sectors with companies, and that are very important for sovereignty and everything. But you think also about a broader movement with open standards, with contribution. And you did hear me in my words. For me, to teach to children to contribute to Wikipedia or OpenStreetMap, to teach to government to share their own source code, etc., is a part of a bigger plan, because we want to reopen and to the global empowering machine of the digital revolution. And so I want to share with you that this is not just an industrial policy, and we have to work with both sides, companies and non-profit organizations, and that's very important from my perspective.
Okay, I have only quite short message. I think open source is great opportunity corresponding with main goals and visions of the European Union, like freedom of knowledge, citizen-centric, decentralized, and many more. So it's on us to support open source to promote independent and free society.
Right. So again, to the beginning of my speech, there is still room for improvement. There is a lot of room for improvement, but also we'll not be able to fill in that room for improvement with actual improvement if we don't do individual steps. So I don't think that we can underestimate the impact of the individual steps that are being done in the right direction. Some of them I have already mentioned, and I would like to add also that in various legislative files that the European institutions produce in the legislative process, there can be done a lot of these little steps. So for instance, I will give you one example. This year, we have adopted the Digital Markets Act, which is a legislation that should give more control into people's hands over their data by actually creating more competition on the markets, because we don't have a level playing field. We have large corporations like Google, Facebook, Amazon that control large portion of digital markets. And within this legislation, I managed to sneak in an obligation for the so-called gatekeepers to enable interoperability for chat platforms, which means that the smaller players, those who very often are free and open source software, like Matrix, for instance, they can become interoperable with these large solutions, and that would make it easier for citizens to change from these solutions of these large companies to free and open source solutions, because they could switch from, let's say, WhatsApp to Matrix and still be in touch with their friends that are at WhatsApp. So this is just an example, but I think this is exactly the way how we should proceed step by step to improve and to incentivize the use and development in free and open source software.
Thank you very much. And actually, on that note of thanks, would you join me in the usual way to show our appreciation of our wonderful fireside chat? Thank you.
It's a real pleasure for us to have here the people that are shaping the open source policies of tomorrow, and also to see your different positions on this. I will now invite our in-person attendees to join us for a short coffee break. It will be located in the courtyard, so just up the stairs, down the corridor on the left where you had the registration and the badges, and there's a courtyard there for the coffee. We will start the session again at 11:45 sharp because we have a very tight schedule with our speakers there, with a panel on cross-border collaboration and digitization from the point of view of the Czech Republic, the EU and its other member states. And as for our online attendees, I invite you as well to maybe have a tea or coffee at home and join us again for the next panel at 11:45. So yeah, see you then. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. I'll do that. Oh, okay. Ready? All good? Okay. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I'll take a seat again, but we're gonna start quite quickly. I hope you all had a nice break. We'll come back to the second part of our morning's panel. I know I want to welcome our speakers that are already on stage here for the next panel. And this time they will discuss the question, how are governments collaborating to create cross-border collaborations and open source solutions? And what does the digital government in Czech Republic look like? Please.
Very good. Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed the fireside chat as much as I did. And now we are moving to a panel where we're actually, to steal an airplane metaphor, we're getting closer to the runway. I'm not quite sure what altitude, we'll see. But we want to kind of get into more of the details from our panel of speakers. Speaking of which, I appreciate Mr. Oczko is joining us virtually. He's under somewhat of a time pressure and I have to leave at 12:15. So I will slightly rejig the panel to make sure that he has enough time to share his thoughts on this important discussion. What I'll do though is first on top of welcoming our esteemed panel, but also briefly introduce them. So starting with Petr Oczko, he's the Deputy Minister for Industry and Trade. He's in charge of digitalization and innovation. He has extensive experience, so away from Olo, across a wide portfolio of areas, finance, budget, structural funds, and co-driving investments into Czechia. As mentioned earlier and introduced earlier, we have Mrs. Gaffey, recently took over the leadership for those who are joining us online for this particular panel of DIGIT at the European Commission. Maria Dahlhager, by the way, do you see my cufflinks? Pretty good, eh? Yeah, no, sorry, Ms. Gaffey, next time I'll get my Irish ones. Anyway, welcome. So Maria is a long-standing Swedish civil servant at the Swedish government, hands-on open source experience, Ministry of Employment, and now working at the Agency for Digital Development, the DIG. So the two of you purposefully sat next door to each other to start collaborating. Actually, that's already happened since yesterday, right, for the first OSPO meeting. So, and then last but not least, Mr. Profond again, I've introduced him before, but I think the important thing is he's the advisor to the Minister of Digitalization, Mr. Bartos, who spoke earlier, is very much involved in this digital agency, which is recently taken off. So I'm going to turn first to you, Minister, if I may. I think it's fitting to start with a question about competitiveness, given your role in industry and trade. How would you assess the understanding and adoption across business sectors, across the public sector, even political groups, as to open source's enabling role in driving competitiveness? Welcome and thank you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much and greetings to Brno. I'm unfortunately unable to join you in person as I have to leave, and that's another thing I wanted to apologize sooner because I have to go to the parliament for some it's a lot of things happening now with all the Ukraine and energy crisis. So apologies for that, and thank you again for inviting me to this interesting discussion. I have to say it's also interesting for me because actually you mentioned some points from my previous career, but actually I started like 25 years ago as actually web developer, like coder, like using primarily open source systems. Actually, I definitely could assess and evaluate how beneficial it was for our small technological startup at the time, and also thanks to that, the technological startup actually has grown into big company. It was then bought actually by much bigger company from another country. I will not name, but I just wanted to say that I was in business many years ago. For us, actually, definitely open source is a way how we can enable the competitiveness of regions. Actually, Brno is an example of such a region where actually IT and of course, for example, Red Hat present there. Actually, open source is definitely one of the driving forces of development of IT-related innovation environment in Brno. More generally, actually, I think from the level of the government, what we should do, and we are doing, of course, to some extent, is that we should actually do some awareness raising and support in the area of innovation, especially in this sense, we speak about innovation in the digital sphere, and focus primarily on SMEs and startups. Again, Brno is an example of how we can do that thanks also to the regional and municipal strategies. On the national level, what we are doing is that we have actually new smart specialization strategy, and this strategy actually speaks about, I don't know if you're familiar with it, what it is for. Actually, smart specialization strategy actually says where the country has innovation potential in companies, where we have great research, and where are the trends. Where these three things meet, there should be our priority to focus on. And actually, in this new smart specialization strategy, we have a lot of domains related to IT, to the development of applications, to digital economy generally, and also open source is one of the priorities. How does it work? This smart specialization strategy is not just a strategy that will remain on the table or wherever on our ministry. It's really being implemented, and actually all the innovation mechanisms that are implemented on the national or regional level should somehow follow this strategy. So I think in the end it's a really great support, because actually, for example, all the support in the area of innovation, finance from the cohesion policy is driven by the smart specialization strategy, but also many of the national schemes. We need to actually maybe to do more awareness raising, but actually the general strategy is there, and the awareness raising actually I think can be done through some mechanisms that we have in place, and I think, for example, Brno, again, if you are in Brno, is example of activities that now can be actually defined under the heading of so-called digital innovation hubs. Digital innovation hubs are actually institutes that were actually created under the Digital Europe program and should work as a network of institutions or consortia, private, regional, or maybe even research institutions that are focusing on support of SMEs, especially SMEs, not only SMEs, but especially SMEs in digital transformation. So I see a lot of potential in this network, and in Brno or in Kuřim, that's next to Brno, is an example of such digital innovation hub, and it's a company that is actually daughter company of South Moravia Innovation Center, and it's called Intermag, and they have a great project that is called Digimat that supports SMEs, including startups in digital transformation. So I think open source solutions have a few ways how to be actually distributed, and the ideas of open source can be communicated through several channels, including these digital innovation hubs, and maybe we should use these channels more than we did up to now, and that might be maybe one of the results of our panel. So that's the answer for the first question.
Very good, thank you. I think one of my takeaways from that is open source is great for economic development in the region. Of course, Brno, as you said, is a great example of that in Czechia, but also, frankly, around the world. You mentioned the Digital Europe program, so I see quite a nice link bridge over to Mrs. Scaffi, who mentioned it earlier in her keynote, around a couple of projects which are being funded by that, one of which is the Leos editor. And also, you went online at the time, but there was also a launch, which again, we particularly appreciated the launch taking place in Brno in Czechia, of the EU's code.europe.eu. So I'd like to ask Mrs. Scaffi a sort of follow-on question, the theme of investment, in terms of the status of Europe's, or rather the EU as an institution's embrace of open source, and perhaps shedding some more light on those kinds of recent investments which you've seen actually already just 6 months of your arrival with the head of digital. Thank you. I'll give you the microphone.
Thank you very much, James. Yeah, I mean, the Commission's commitment to open source, I think, is getting stronger and stronger as time goes on. And I think we were talking at the coffee break, it is very much an incremental process. When you look back and see that it's all this work started 20 years ago, and we move forward step by step. And what the Commission is trying to do is build its own capacity as regards open source inside the House and across the most important DGs, and then also to identify the funding sources that are available from the European funds that can be accessed by developers, can be accessed for interesting individual projects. And then we have to see how can we draw from what is good and share what works well across the whole of Europe. So I mentioned earlier on the next generation internet funding. So that seems to be very successful in reaching open source projects. And it's helping to fund open source developers who are working on the edge of innovation. And sometimes some of our European funding sources are not so good at supporting innovation. So I think this is good. Maybe some of our big traditional funding programs like structural funds have not been so good at that in the past. I was interested to hear about the Recovery and Resilience Fund challenges this morning. And I was particularly interested because I spent 15 years of my career in the Commission working on regional policy. So it seems to me that it is the more innovative, smaller kind of initiatives that are the ones that are going to support open source projects the better. So yeah, another area we're involved in Digit is bug bounties and hackathons. And these came out of a pilot project and preparatory action by the European Parliament. We heard the FOSSEPS project mentioned this morning as well by myself, and they've asked me to tell you what the acronym stands for, because even though Thijs told me about 10 minutes ago, I've forgotten it already. But these pilot projects are helping to challenge the Commission to innovate, because we're not the most innovative organization, but we are finding ways to support innovation through these kind of projects. We're doing hackathons with the United Nations as well, but we need to think about not just about how we fund hackers, but how we find ways to fund the developers in the first place. So co-creation sounds good, but it's not easy. And I don't think we should pretend that it is easy, but we are trying hard. So we have to work with our peers, exchange experiences and learn from our mistakes, but maybe not only learn from our mistakes, more importantly, learn from our successes and share our successes. But I think there are quite a number of opportunities for funding, for open source, and the Commission is certainly committed to making sure that those are exploited. Thanks.
Great. One such example, if you look up in the corner, there's the European flag. It's the Czech Cybercrime Center of Excellence, paid for by one of those funds. So more to come. So, Minister, I appreciate you have a few more minutes with us. I would like to go back to you, if I may, and talk a little bit more about what you were elaborating around competitiveness, but this time in the case of real jobs. And of course, that's front and center at the moment in terms of the challenges where the headwinds that we're all facing. The question here is about Czechia's impressive record when it comes to IT talent, that skills development in universities like this, but others across the country. And a little bit what Ambassador Belli was saying about the importance of also doing likewise at an educational, at a school level. But the question is really about this leadership we see here in Brno, and how you see that sort of evolving, not only in Czechia, but also given your current presidency beyond across Europe, in terms of building out more jobs in open source, and thereby helping further the competitiveness. And one data point, which I think Marcel mentioned, was the EU's report on open source, which talks about for every 10% increase in contribution upstream, you get a 0.6% GDP points uplift. So that's a pretty significant link. So I'm really interested to hear more from you on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks, and yeah, I'm happy that you assess the Czech Brno ecosystem as a nice example for how the EU, I think it is really so. The answer is that actually there is no short way to achieve the success, and Brno and the South Moravian region shows that you have to be actually very focused and consequent in your steps for many years to achieve this level of excellent innovation in ecosystem that actually Brno and surroundings actually is now. I'm not sure about exactly, but I think it was like year 2000 or 2001 when actually the new innovation strategy in Brno was actually approved. And the important fact was that it was not so much changed by the new political representations every 4 or even less years. So this is really important to have a strategy, a clear vision, and not to change it every few years. And I think it's clear success now, and no politicians in the South Moravian region, I think, would change the innovative nature of the city and the region itself. So it's one thing. The second thing is that we need to speak about education, and of course, changing the educational system is not easy. I think what works in Brno, but also in Prague and a few other parts of the Czech Republic is definitely support of partnerships between private sector, academia, and the public sector. Again, taking example from Brno, we can speak about actually newly established, but based on previous cooperation, Cybersecurity Innovation Hub, that is actually a partnership of universities, public bodies, clusters, and definitely this hub also helps to actually increasing the importance of education also in open source in the region. We need more of these partnerships. Actually, in the Czech Republic, I have be a bit self-critical. The educational system, I think on the level of universities it works very well, but the elementary and high schools, it's more difficult. And if the region is active and supports the transformation on the level of high schools, it works well. But we have a lot of regions where it is not so much, and it doesn't work in that way as in the Brno region. So we need more focused national strategy to actually produce more IT talents and of course also IT talents that are aware of the benefits of open source. So this is difficult. Of course, the regional or the elementary and high school education is not something that is, of course, too much harmonized on the EU level. So what we can do is to actually support increasing the best practice in change, supporting the partnerships, supporting the network of digital innovation hubs that also can work with the schools. This is something really important. And because I will have to leave, I just say a few words that are not so much or not directly linked to the jobs question, but are linked to the presidency of the EU that we have now. I just wanted to say in more general terms that actually I know that this is not directly speaking about open source, but what is really high priority of the Czech presidency is to push the digital legislative files that are on the table. That of course can actually help to develop new solutions, new applications that can help to increasing competitiveness and improve the lives of the citizens. We have AI Act, we have Data Act, and also thanks to the French presidency, we have already approved a Data Governance Act, and this is something that I think we should take care about quick implementation, because Data Governance Act brings a lot of measures how to actually facilitate reuse of data from public sector, and how to generate new data intermediaries. And of course, the data are blood for any applications for the data economy. So this is I also wanted to mention. I know that this is not directly to the point of open source, but I think speaking about open data is also really important, and data governance as well as Data Act to some extent can really help to increase the sharing of data in the EU. Thank you.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you. I think on that point on skills, everybody in this room, everybody online, absolutely stands ready to help develop and involve those kinds of partnerships. On the presidency front, point taken, a lot of legislation which has been adopted. Marcel talked about the DMA earlier, but also there's a raft of legislation coming through, and a lot of it potentially very positive for open source. Yesterday was the Cyber Resilience Act, which has been launched with an exemption for open source. So I think again the default to open approach is there, and it's good to see, and more of that to come. I appreciate you need to drop now, so I'd like to thank you for your time and your participation, and look forward to working with you on behalf of everyone in the next few months of your presidency, but also after that.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure, and I have to apologize really, and I wish you good luck to your panel and the conference. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. So I'd like to turn to Maria, if I may. Talked about this whole essence of sharing and reusing, and the importance of helping one another at a country level, or at a company level, at a civil society level. I mean, Sweden is well regarded in terms of its digital / open source credentials. Yes, there's more to do, as often is the case, but it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about what you see and what you saw as key drivers in Sweden's success, and then a little bit sort of forward-looking in terms of your own digital agency and projects which you have underway. Thank you.
First, I would like to elaborate a bit on as open as possible and as closed as necessary, because we're talking about open by default, which is a very important principle. My authority, Agency for Digital Government, DIG, we have a policy, an open source policy, which is saying everything we procure should be open standards and open source. And everything we develop should be licensed with an open source license. And this is also accordingly to the Tallinn Declaration 2017. So this is nothing new. This is something we already know, but still it's difficult for the public sector to reach to that level. And we are working really hard on that. And what we see is that it's rather difficult when it comes to procurement and the procurement departments. How do they work with open source? Because you don't have to procure open source. It's just to download, try out, and use. So that is rather good. Also on the same topic, we have a very old law in Sweden. It's from 1766. It's a public access to government information. So transparency is very important for us. But more important is actually the dialogue. So what we have, which I'm very proud of, it's an open forum, it's a community forum on our national data portal, where people can, anybody, citizens, companies, academia, anybody can ask questions or discuss topics about our digital commons, the APIs, open source. Some people would like to start working on a project together, and they do it. I even have the app on my phone. So every day, a couple of messages is coming in, people asking for contributions, and we're helping each other out. So far, we have 60,000 visitors, and we have over 2,000 topics. And this is, I think, a key success factor, that we start communicating, we start to talk, we try to be as transparent as possible. But everything is not to be transparent. The other side is as closed as necessary. And we too need to work on that. Some information and some systems are critical functions of our society. Some information is the information about our citizens. So even if we would like to use the cloud to scale up and scale down, it's sometimes difficult due to GDPR and also due to that it's not suitable. So we are collaborating again, a couple of authorities. So the Swedish Social Security Agency, they are hosting the IT operations of some of the Swedish authorities. And success story for this is also, of course, well, open source, using an open source infrastructure to make it possible for digital sovereignty. And this has been ongoing since 2017, like a trial, but now we are seeing great results. So our government has a proposal that my agency will start to look at the next step to make this a more permanent solution. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much. We will stay tuned. I think this is a huge opportunity, not only for Sweden, but also for other member states to study and emulate in the open source way. When I said Sweden was digitally advanced, I now realize if you started off in 1766, I mean, look no further. Good. Well, Mr. Profil, if I may bring you into the discussion. So we talked a little bit about your role within the new digital agency. I appreciate, again, in the airplane metaphor, getting a bit more detailed about some of the achievements, some of your plans, some of the challenges in terms of accelerating this effort. And of course, it would be interesting to hear, how you see the Swedes as an agency, as an inspiration, but others which are particularly noteworthy. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have to describe the Czech organization of digitalization. The government has a new position of Vice Prime Minister for digitalization. It's new in this government. This government is set about a little more than half a year. We are in the process of founding the Central Authority for e-Government called Digital and Information Agency, DIA. Now the government is led. The e-government is led by Ministry of Interior, as I speak. The digitalization of business is supported by Ministry of Trade, by Mr. Očko. We have very robust laws and regulations. For example, we were one of the first states with law about clouds in the public sector. Of course, this approach can be very bureaucratic and inflexible. Our central shared information system, like basics registry, data exchange, and so are good on paper, but very old, and even the hardware is old. And it's because the organization, because it's not priority of current Ministry of Interior, and that's one things that we are changing and bringing a more stable budget in this area and more expertise. Because one of the problems why there is no update, for example, of hardware, which is easy, you just buy hardware, it's not some rocket science, is that there are no experts, so a lot of procurement are bad and criticized and cancelled and things like that. The rest of the government is decentralized. Every institution is procure its own software and hardware. Only thing is that there are some central enterprise architecture. So to the goals, our goals are until the end of this year, found the Digital and Information Agency, change the procurement law to be more flexible. We are solving the issue of horizontal cooperation between the state department. Like if you want to buy something from another ministry, you need to do a procurement in Czech law, and it's absurd because you are one state, one institution in the end of the day. So of course you can do some internal things. So we are changing the procurement law in this way to be more flexible. And the last goal for this year is our own budget chapter and national chapter for the next year. So on the nation level, you will see the budget for this institution. That's now not transparent, because you see the budget of Ministry of Interior and the digitalization is so small that there are in some item like rest. It's absurd. And our plan for the next year, set up proper modern working culture in our agency. That's important because we need a young talent. We need to be flexible, and for this we need a proper modern working culture. And this is not common in our other public institution to have some good working culture, home office, sick days, and things like that. The next goal is set up collaboration between DEA and other institutions. This is crucial. We building central authority, and we need to collaborate with another institution. So proper collaboration is key. Of course, cooperation with the Czech newly found OSPO to promote the open source, and without the agency OSPO, the Czech OSPO will be only NGO without a partner in the public sector. Next goal is build our nation cloud. Another goal is stabilize the situation about central shared software. As I mentioned, there are old, and it's items for a museum, I think. So we need to prepare some projects to renew this software, and I hope in some modern way. We can use agile approach. We can use open source, and so. And the last but not least, preparing to the EU wallet from EID. There is a lot of things that the member state has to prepare. For example, the data sources. The wallet itself, it will be some technical specification, not so complex, but the data source can be a little tricky. For example, in Czech Republic, we have no information about students on universities or as the government. The universities are independent and they have students. Of course, we financing them, but only there is financing only per capita. It's not good for some recognition of status of student, or to describe the expertise or something like this. And we have to manage to collaborate with our universities, for example, and other data sources to prepare the European wallet. So this is our plan. And
fantastic, thank you. I guess you're not alone in terms of trying to update procurement law. I think there's a lot of will to do that, and I think what I see in some member states, there are inadvertent outcomes which are unexpected. So, for example, if you're like an idea from thin air, if you're selling services, many of the procurement models are engineered for proprietary services. and therefore with different liability caps, and that really makes things life difficult for open source.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest problem in the current IT. Of course, the procurement law and so the budgeting law, CapEx versus OpEx. It's a big problem in transition to cloud. And on this topic, we need a collaboration of Ministry of Finance. So it's not so easy because, of course, it's rigid and their rules are good without the comment, and we cannot change them because they are the best. So this will be another challenge for us.
Great, thank you. You mentioned the capex opex, and that makes me think of someone else on the panel. I'll come to in a second, but also you mentioned about proper and working cultures, and this is something which again European Commission, in particular Digit, has been doing for a long time in terms of acting as a kind of spoke in a hub in the wheel of member states. So it'd be interesting, Ms. Gaffey, if I can hand over to you about your now vision going forward around Digit's enabling convening role when it comes to kind of further developing that default open posture. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier all the various funding sources that there are for open source. And I think there never will be a fund focusing on open source by itself. So I think, but then the open source community is a very agile, flexible community. So I think they need to be creative in finding their way through the European Union funding sources. And I think we at Digit are happy to help them. But what we are going to, our next initiative we are going to take is to see how can we bring the community of open source together. And we think we can help to do this through our Interoperability Europe Act, which we hope we will be able to publish our proposal before the end of the year, in time for the Czech presidency to initiate discussions with Council and Parliament. So this is a regulation that has been prepared by the Commission in close collaboration with the member states. It's based on a decades-long cooperation between member states, but the vision is that we have to find a mechanism where we can pull together the good practices and the learning that has been generated among public administrations at local, national and European level. And we think this will help to validate, give value to the work that is done on open source, and will help identify the really good examples. And we mentioned as well the code.europa.eu this morning. That will be a repository for many of these examples. But basically, we see it working across all member states, across cultural borders, and transcending different sectors. So basically, we want to create a culture of open cooperation and transparency. And that, for us, will be the future interoperability policy for Europe. And it's quite interesting in the discussions we've had within the Commission. Some people across the Commission have said, "Oh, what are you doing? What are you trying to do?" And we will propose a regulation, but we are not making it a requirement for every member state to participate. Member states will participate at the level they wish to and to the extent they want to. But it's the member states asked us for a regulation. It's just interesting how some people in the more traditional parts of the Commission found it hard to understand how we wanted to go about this. And I suppose in the end, as everything in this area, it's been an incremental process over 20 years. So we'll make our proposal, we will have discussion with member states, with Parliament, and then of course we'll have to implement it. And it's only as we implement it that we will really see what needs to be improved and how we can work better. So that's our ambitious ambition. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much. Just listening to you talk about culture of open collaboration, in one of the resources which I use very often is the Commission's OSOR, Open Source Observatory. And back in Sweden, Maria's, if I'm mistaken, driving a similar repository or similar collaboration platform. I think it's NoSAD, as in not happy, but NoSAD.se. And for example, I think the next, I'm just looking at the website actually, the next session dealing on business models, open source business models on the 8th of November, bringing in all sorts of different players to talk this through. So I think that more of that is needed, both at EU level, at member state level, to kind of clarify and illustrate what the state of the art is. Actually, on that front, conscious we're running out of time, so in fact, Maria, I'm going to ask you the sort of final question, then I'll leave the fellow panelists to provide a closing statement. So if you'd like them to elaborate more on NoSAD and NoSAD's collaborative tools, but also, of course, we mentioned before, the Deputy Minister was mentioning the Czech presidency, and of course, it's Sweden's turn next. If there's anything you want to share with us in advance, that would be great. In particular, that sort of focus and potential opportunity. I appreciate recent election, but open source's enablement, I assume, would continue as a theme, and it's to be seen how much of a priority status that receives. So, Maria.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we'll of course continue with open source and the great work that we are achieving now and here. And just being here for 2 days and being part of all interesting discussions, seeing all great opportunities that are out there. I have a colleague of mine, he always say, the first day of starting to share is actually today. And I think that this is something we should do. So the first thing I would do is to share my contacts with you so we can start collaborating on, for instance, cybersecurity, because that is something very important. And another thing I will do is I will try to summarize this event. I will put it on the Swedish community forum so everyone else can also take part of what we have been discussing today. So these are the 2 things that I would like to do. Then I would like, I know it's not so much time, but I will try to say one more thing. We have a saying in Swedish, köp inte grisen i säcken. And since you know some Swedish, maybe we would like to translate. Okay, that's do not buy the pig in the sack. Before I was talking about a law from 1766, but this goes back to the medievals. Before we knew that when we are doing procurements, we need to check what we actually are buying. And I think that is something we can work more on, and also cross-border. So I would like to do more cross-border coding. So let's put out our code, let's package it in a way that we can actually collaborate cross-border. Sweden, Czech Republic, that is what I would like to do.
Yeah, I'm very happy that we can collaborate, and we will do, and with the open cities, of course, because I think we have a lot of common, and we challenge the same problem in the organization of state and in the mitigation of vendor lock-ins. Yeah.
So I think that's we've got 3 minutes on the clock. Yep. Thank you. So I think that's a fairly open, I think, challenge, invitation perhaps, that we explore how to take this event, step it up into the next presidency, and of course, in the meantime, there'll be a huge amount of collaboration through the EU's OSPO and other fora. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity for us all to continue to scale this conversation. So with 3 minutes to go, I'm just going to hand back the microphone in that direction just to have a sort of final statement, and we close out the panel. Thank you.
Keep collaborating, keep having the dialogue. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Oh, I have no words now. But I think the important thing is a strong community and to continue dialogue between all the stakeholders.
Thank you. I think it should be clear from what I've said already today that the Commission recognizes the global, strategic and practical value of free and open source. We're committed to advance on establishing a working culture based on the principles of open source, and we look forward to the increased pace of work with our peers in the member states, with the open IT service providers and with open source software developers, because I think we've got huge potential that we can unleash if we get this right. Thanks.
So I've got the easy job to ask you all to put your hands together and show your appreciation for a brilliant panel. Thank you.
Again, to all our speakers and to our moderator, James, for this particularly interesting discussion. I will now have the privilege to introduce our final panel of the morning, or almost morning now, with a particular focus on the Czech Republic and its place in the heart of a connected Europe. Please welcome our speakers on stage for this panel and our moderator, Lucia Smolka, who will introduce our panelists. Yeah.
Us for this panel. My name is Lucia Smolka. I'm your moderator for this panel. And this panel is called How Can the Czech Republic Be at the Heart of a Connected Europe? Well, little about me. I'm an IT law attorney and founder of NGO Open Content, and I also act as a chairperson of Open Cities. I hope you'll enjoy our panel and also the after-lunch part of this conference. So I'll start with the short introduction of this panel, and then I will introduce our dear speakers. So it is clear that open source software has been an essential element of the European technology ecosystem for decades. Around the world, companies and public services are using open source collaborative methods to innovate and create new solutions. It is likely that in any new project involving software, a large part of the code will be based on open source. The use of open source in the Czech Republic is quite high, especially in companies and IT communities, and it's also becoming a large part of public administration. We can even find a dedicated open source portal, which we've already talked about. We have a lot of open source conferences. We have a lot of enthusiasts, professionals, and also fans, and we also have the drive to make the difference. However, in order to really make a difference in Czech Republic, when it comes to the use of open source applications, we need to go further and unify our efforts and create a body like we say Czech National OSPO, Open Source Program Office, to enable knowledge transfer between stakeholders and similar partners across Europe to leverage existing knowledge and also the best practices. So I welcome the speakers of our last panel today to discuss these topics and to draw inspirations too. So I will first introduce Mr. Jiří Hlavenka, regional representative of South Moravian region, investor and also author of many publications and articles. Since 1990, he has been involved in many areas of business. He co-founded the specialist publishing house Computer Press and launched the country's first online shop Vltava.cz. Since 2005, he has been investing more in innovative technology startups. Since 2016, he has been a representative of South Moravian region and also chairman of the South Moravian Region Council Commission for Information Openness. And Jiří is also a member of the Open Cities Committee and its expert advisor. So thank you very much for joining us today. Please welcome Jiří. Okay, I'm now pleased to introduce Mr. Petra Dzurovčínová, the first Chief Innovation Officer in Bratislava. She is responsible for preparing the innovation strategy for the city, creating a network of stakeholders from academic, business, and also civic sectors. She has a business background. She previously ran the startup Freya Care and helped companies with business development, marketing strategies, and innovation efforts. Petra was the founding executive manager at the Slovak Alliance for Innovation Economy. She was responsible for setting a strategic vision, recruiting members, and building networks among policymakers in Slovakia and on the EU level. Thank you very much for joining us today, Petra. Our next speaker is Mr. Jakub Onderka, security analyst at the government's Computer Emergency Response Team, which is part of the National Cyber and Information Security Authority and plays a key role in protecting critical information infrastructure and other systems under the Cybersecurity Act. His work includes critical information infrastructure controls and related technical measures and drafting cybersecurity regulations and dealing with the most serious cyber attacks taking place in the Czech Republic. Jakub is also an experienced open source developer, and he's dedicated to increasing awareness of open source capabilities, uses, and benefits. Thank you very much for joining us today, Jakub. And last but certainly not least, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Karel Minařík, Chief Technology Officer in Česko Digital. Karel worked as a graphic designer, project manager, lecturer of interactive design at the Institute of Digital Media, lecturer of Introduction to Programming at the Department of New Media Studies, Faculty of Art, Chelsea University. And he's as a chief software engineer and software architect. He also created many websites and applications and also contributed to many open source projects. As part of this career, he now has taken up a position at Česko Digital, where he takes care of the technical competence of the organizations and its overall increase. His goal is to take the digital transformation in Czech Republic to the next level. Thank you very much for joining us today. Okay, so I will now start with the question to Jiří Hlavenka. So, Jiří, open source is becoming an increasingly important tool at various levels of state and local governments. Would you please share your insight with how about open source, open standards, and principles of open collaborations are taking shape from your point of view as a governor of South Moravian region for innovation and digitization?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. For the recording, perfect. Well, just first, I would like to say that I'm a real supporter of open source software and principles. And as Lucia meant, my former sins, it came some funny story that my publishing house published the first books about open source in this republic. One of the first, because I see many guys with the red hats pass about the Red Hat Linux. It was in years 2000. I don't know if you have the books in the library. I see Lubo Schmidt as a general director of the company. If not, you can buy it today still for 2 crowns, which is €1.40. Yeah? It is memorabilia, actually. You cannot use it. If you can't, I maybe have it in private library. I will give it to you. Well, back to the open source. Maybe a top level view is that I view open source not only as a good software solution itself, but as a tools, a set of tools to foster and increase the speed of digital transformation, to increase the speed of the innovation. Because those tools, in principle, how they are built are encouraging innovation and encouraging transformation. However, to penetrate them in the, let's say, public administration, I'm responsible for the IT in South Moravia region, which is the office with 800 people, so which is a large office with 200 schools, with 400 social institutions, and so on. So it is pretty complex things. It is difficult because if I may use the wartime terminology in these days, the enemy is strong, has dig deeper, and is well fortified. Yeah. Especially when you see this, the logbook software is deeply integrated across the departments, it is very difficult to replace. I think that everybody knows what I mean. Yeah. What we are built. So how to approach it? How to address it? What we did first is that we will be. I say that okay, this is long term and difficult. What is maybe easier and short term is data. So opening the data is something we could do rather easily, rather quickly. So we now are publishing several hundreds of data sets in the intelligent form with API for everyone to use. As I came here, I came across, passed across the Moravská zemská knihovna, the Moravian country library. We, for example, helped to digitalize the cultural heritage of South Moravia, like written papers a couple of hundreds of years ago to digitalize them, to put some money to digitalize them and to make them accessible for the public. Yeah? So those are just things to the examples of the how we approach the open data. Still, what remains are the open software systems, and really this is things that needs a lot of time. We do step by step, so it means that sometimes we can replace some fragment, sometimes not. And obviously, we are trying. We actually need help because administration is here just a customer. We don't have powers to develop, and I don't think that like regional office should be a software developer. I don't think it is his role. But we are encouraging developers to provide us with solutions that we can, and even with the ways how to implement. This is not only just to so help us to penetrate with the open source software better in the administration. But this is a really long work, and I'm happy that there is an initiative that will cover it from top down. This is very important. Thank you.
This is a bit difficult with the movement of the mic, but we'll manage. Exactly. Thank you, Jiří. It was very insightful, and we would like to help in open cities with penetrating the open source to public administration. So, thank you. As we speak about the public level at the cities and the regions, I'd like to ask Petra. So as we consider what open means at the municipal level, can you tell us about the work of your team? Part of your job is to prepare the innovation strategy for Bratislava. What role does open innovation play in your plans? Could you maybe tell us also about your city website and the open source impact? Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia, and it's good afternoon, everyone. So working out in the open is crucial for us. It kind of changed the position of being the municipality and telling everyone the top-down approach, like this is how we're going to do things. So we started to work out in the open. It's very vulnerable position because you're going out there and you're trying to talk to people and ask them what they think and engage them in the process. So we're not showing them something that is finished. We are trying to co-design our services and what the city offers with residents and our stakeholders. I actually would like to follow up what Maria was saying, and we are facing one of the biggest challenges on our times. So climate change is happening, and it's kind of a step up from looking just at technology, because technology can be an enabler to help us solve these problems. But we need to look at it more broadly. Open thinking and co-creation and collaboration can help us solve these big challenges. I know that there are many cities in Sweden that are involved in the mission of 100 climate neutral and smart cities. And it is really, really important to co-create solutions and try different types of solutions, pilot them and find frameworks for cities, the size of Bratislava or Brno or any bigger ones, to try out solutions that could be open, that could be transferred to other cities, and create portfolios of solutions that we can spread out to other countries and other cities across Europe and across the world. So that's the way we're trying to think about it. Just it's more broader than just thinking about open source technology and websites. Of course, we are working on our websites as well. And I would disagree with Yuri actually, because we do have our own development team in-house, just because we realized that we need to take ownership of how we develop technologies. We need to have those brains in-house to say, these are the technologies we wanted to use, these are the standards we want to use. And that team works with our collaborators, with our suppliers, and they are kind of leading the change. And without them, we wouldn't be able to be an effective partner for the outer world. We have just finished our website. It was a long process, and it kind of shows how we work with stakeholders. So at the beginning, we really tested every single step of the way, from the way the sitemap is designed, from designs to setting up processes with our colleagues. So we engaged 100 people from the City Hall to take part in this process. So they take it from as their job and as part of their work to have a successful presentation. And at the end of the day, we've published the code for the website on GitHub, which is one of the first institutions in Slovakia to do so. And we're really glad because we already had someone contributing and improving what we're trying to do. So we'd like to go this way forward. And let me check my notes. I might have something else I want to share with you. Yes, innovation policy. That was also a very interesting journey, because we as a city were very closed up. We didn't really collaborate with our academic partners, not as good as in Brno, because you have a really nice collaboration here, but we didn't have that. And we are trying to identify what are the key areas of research and business exploration, because we are losing many talented students to Brno. They choose to come here, or Czech Republic in general. And we would like to keep them and explore and kind of enrich our research opportunities and have Bratislava grow as strong as Brno and other cities in Czech Republic with collaborating together. So that's another way of kind of opening up and adhering to the principles of collaboration, which I think we can see in open source as well.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting about the website, because a lot of the cities in Czech Republic, especially the small ones, are looking forward to some solution which is open source and they can use it easily, and we would like to try to help with that, but it's a big process and big task to make happen. Also, part of the open source is definitely cybersecurity. And my next question is for Jakub. When you have open source software, lot of different people are contributing to the software, and they can possibly search for errors and they can propose modifications. So what experience do you have with the open source software in cybersecurity? What should be taken into account in the terms of cybersecurity when working with open source in public administration?
Good afternoon. So directly in the cybersecurity field, open source and open standard are crucial for securing communication and or data, not just in critical information infrastructure, but in the whole internet. For example, many tools that we use for securing communication aid that are just open source. And even if we want to use closed source software, there is not the software that is comparable with open source, because many people that works in that field are really fans of open source, and they collaborate even when, for example, they are home after work or during their holidays. And the time is also a key factor during handling cybersecurity incident. For example, you are going to a place and you want to help them with to fight with hackers, and you don't have time to call your economic department and ask for money for buying license for some software or hardware. So deploying open source tools to fight hackers is sometimes the only way how public administration can do that. Maybe in the commercial sector it can be different. They can give some organization has like money directly assigned to this usage, but in the public sector it can be very hard to do that because of many stricter law that public sector must follow. And from perspective like cybersecurity, when somebody wants to use or release open source software, I think it's two things. It's two different, because using open source software in public sector or in critical information infrastructure is just normal. It's a long time that this is possible. There is no law that's telling organization that it is not possible. For example, in Czech Republic, energy sectors use Red Hat as operation system. So without this open source, energy will not work in Czech Republic. But the security of open source can be sometimes tricky, as it was in the question that many people can collaborate in that software, and it's not sometimes you can read in when somebody wants to promote open source software, they said it's more secure than closed source. It's not true all the times. It can be, but it can be not, and it depends on many factors. And one of the advantage of open source software is it's possible to do software audits. But on the other hand, and from my experience, companies, even in very even companies that has even a lot of money, more than public sector, don't do software audits because it's very expensive and it also takes time. So if you want to deliver software for your citizens fast, it's not a good idea to do code audit. And it's also a problem with cybersecurity, because sometimes you have, if there is like 0 days, so that means there is critical vulnerability, and you have to deploy a new version very fast to fix that vulnerabilities. There is no time to do software audits. So my recommendation, not just for public sector, is to start something like bug bounty program. That means that anybody from your country or from other country, from the whole world, can send you a report that something wrong is in your software. There is software vulnerability, security vulnerability in your software or in software that you use, and the organization will pay money. That's, for example, European Commission do that. They chose 15 or 20 software, and if somebody find, and that software is used by European Commission or organization in European Union, and if somebody finds a software vulnerability, they pay them, for example, for KeePass, if you know that software, they pay 71,000 euros. So this is the way how, if you want to use some open source, you can check if somebody already opened that program, bug bounty, for the software that you want to use, or if you want to release open source software, you can make your own program. But I understand that it can be hard for public institution, not just because of lack of funding, but also from the legal problems that can be there.
Thank you, Jakub. You have mentioned that open source can take a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of people contributing. So now I would like to ask Karel, so how does volunteering fit in open source software development in the context of governments? Do you see any obstacles that need to be overcome?
Thanks for the question. It's actually a question which is close to my heart. I would first like to maybe address what is actually open source, because we are talking the whole day here about what is open source. Is it a JavaScript library for padding string with zeros or spaces, or is it something like Linux or Apache Kafka? This is completely incomparable, and it's really important to keep this in mind. It's not just the big projects we're using. It's small projects we're using, but it might be also the services and applications which is produced by the public institutions. Also, there's a lot of big businesses, based around open source. Red Hat is one, of course. There's a lot of people here. My former employee, Elastic, which makes Elasticsearch Kibana, also, does good business based on open source, right? So what I think is important to understand is that underneath there are some core values, and if I would kind of pinpoint two, it's openness, which means everybody can contribute. I mean, not every crazy contribution will get into the main line of the projects, but you can do that. You can usually open a pull request or something, and there's some kind of discussion around it. The other big, aspect to me is transparency, because everything happens in the open. Every discussion, every feature request, every bug report, that is transparent. GitHub, GitLab, other service like that. And these two values are really, really important when we talk about open source, either in terms of like pre-made solutions, like let's say Apache Kafka, or specific applications and services, So to me, the other thing to address is that it is human nature to cooperate. It is that is just a fact, Of course, people like to lie, steal, kill. That's also true, right? But we are successful as a species because of the cooperation, not because the ability to kill, right? Many other animals kill and they are not as successful as we are, And that addresses the part of your question about volunteering, because that is what we see in civic tech organizations around the world. And that is actually what we see in Česko Digital in this aspect. People are really keen for this reason. It's not for no reason. It's for this reason of the ability to cooperate, to really, contribute to something. And that might be writing code, but that might be writing, a nice Twitter text, or contributing documentation or something like that, So to me, this is really important to keep in mind. It's not just a technical discussion and not just about vendor locking. That's important, but that might sideline these important topics. As for the obstacles, ironically, the most obstacles we see here and encounter is the argument about security, which Jakub kind of addressed, right? And I see that is ironic because, the original mantra of Linux is given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And that is still true, And understand what Jakub is saying. Of course, there are vulnerabilities in open source, pretty severe ones at times, but they are addressed, And it's completely delusional to think that commercial software doesn't have vulnerabilities like that. That's just delusional. Like people are people. Coders writing commercial software are the same coders in many cases as the open source coders, right? So I like that Petra mentioned that they actually do publish, part of their website, part of the applications or services as open source, because that is something I increasingly see as more important than the vendor locking, etc. discussions. Now let me close with just one example. So the official COVID dashboard for the UK is completely open source. It's the official dashboard used by it was used during the pandemics by the doctors, politicians, journalists, everybody, the public, you know. And by completely open source, I mean, it's based on open source technologies. It uses PostgreSQL with the Citrix extension, so it's a distributed database, pretty sophisticated system. It's not just a website. This is a real application, you know. It's also completely open source in the sense that all the code is at GitHub, the official, you know, organization for that particular department of the UK government. And by code, I don't mean just the front end, you know, a bunch of JavaScript and HTML files. I mean, all the services, all the data transformations, because they did a lot of cleanups, et cetera, and also the Terraform definitions for building the whole infrastructure. So that, to me, you know, is what we should strive for. And when you look up that dashboard at GitHub, you will see external contributions. Sometimes they minor, you know, it's fixing a bug. Like when I click this button, it doesn't do what it should. But imagine how a developer at the public institution would be happy when somebody just fixes their bug. So that should be great to strive for this.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting. You talked about values and motivations, and I think all of our who are here, we share these values, but I think we have to also to spread it to other communities and other people, maybe other governments. And so I would like to ask Jiří. So we have seen open source and open innovation identified as foundations element for government's futures, from economic recovery to solving day-to-day issues to helping citizens. So what's your view on how open source in the policy context is key to creating successful outcomes for connecting people and governments across Europe?
Thank you. Well, I see that we have some depth here, yeah, that we don't communicate too much across the governments, across the countries, maybe even across the different offices in the Czech Republic. Everybody just loves to look inside his office and work inside his office. So we truly have some depth. We need to start talking, start communicating. Maybe this conference is maybe a very good start here, yeah. And well, I would like to speak about two things. First is to share the solutions. Yeah? To share the solution that somebody has developed. This is principle of open source, absolutely, which is maybe the little bit difficult things, because okay, the solutions are mostly tailor-made on individual legislations, cultural you know, things, different stages of the evolution in the different countries and the government structures of the government. Each country has a completely different structure, so this is not very easy, but it even should be done if we talk enough and we learn what other country, what in Sweden, in Netherlands, has developed, and get a very good experience. They had results. Yeah? We need to look on the solutions with great results. Say, hey, should we somehow adopt it? Should we somehow use it? Yeah? This is something we should do. So maybe a little more than just to take over what is done. By the way, who is a developer here? Raise a hand. Okay, a lot of, yeah. So we know that what the developer loves most, to write code, right? Write code, this is your job, yeah? This is what you love, yeah? To take over others' code, understand the thinking of other developer, this is nightmare, nobody likes it, yeah? But okay, sharing thought, sharing the, let's say, best practice, okay, you develop something in Sweden, it works. Well, let's take just an inspiration, let's do it himself. This is also the sharing of the, and this is the connecting and communicating. So I believe that we could look at the smart solutions that are developed around us, take inspiration and try to think how we can learn from that and adapt it. Yeah. By the way, we in the short Marawi, I also trying to reply of your speech, launched an agency because we need to somehow a little bit separate it from the administration. It's called the INAC. This is short for probably nothing, but it sounds good. But this is agency for promoting modern solution for the public sector. So we have some 3 or 4 main directions. One is, let's say, modern energetics, that is mobility, and one of them are software solutions. Yeah, so this is a tool, or this is vehicle for delivering the solutions to the public sphere, to the municipalities, to all the organizations. So this should be let's say a vehicle to do it. Yeah. And I believe that this office is a right subject to communicate with others. As I think that this model is replicated in many countries. So it is not inside the administration, so it is some agency or office which is a little bit separated to have more autonomy. Yeah. This is maybe something that, as Ondra mentioned, this agency. So we will not put it in directly as a member of the office, but we will little separate it, give it an autonomy, give it a budget, and let them work. Yeah. So these institutions should work together and try to learn from the best experience, inspire, and bring that solutions.
Thank you. Yeah, communication is super important, and we would like to create the space here at the conference and also after the conference. So hopefully we'll be able to share more and talk about our challenges and problems. So Petra, as your experience as a CIO, what challenges have you had to overcome? What advice would you give to other cities looking to innovate their operations and looking for inspirations? And maybe you can share also what not to do, maybe?
Well, before I answer the set of questions, I would like to say, Carol, it's true. When my developer team gets a pull request from the outside, they are the happiest. So it's really nice to have people contributing. But Lucia, to answer your question or questions, I think the biggest challenge was building trust. With my colleagues, public servants are usually not really trusting new things. And when you come as part of design thinking, first thing they learn on the first workshop is trust the process. And it's open, it's messy, it's iterative, and it's really, really hard for people who are kind of used to one way of doing things. So that was one of the biggest challenges. But now the people that went through the process with us really trusted and really enjoy it. And they always come back to us and they ask us, what problem are we trying to solve? What is the reason we're doing this thing? And that's the most important thing. And for whom also, that's what we need to ask every single day. Is this solution beneficial to someone? Does it solve their problem? A really crucial problem they're facing. So those are kind of the very important things we're trying to share with anyone who's thinking about starting the way to work out in the open, because I think it's crucial to be very transparent about it. And part of that is communication. So when we were working on the website, every single month, we had something internally called show and tell, where we presented what we are working on, what's the progress of the website with our colleagues. And we had a couple of setbacks as well. So we had to communicate some unpleasant things, but we tried to tell them, okay, some things didn't work out, some things took longer than we expected, but we want to invite you to be part of the process. We want you to understand that it is not a piece of, it's not a notebook, it's not a statue, it's something that changes and evolves in time, and we want you to be part of that. So that's kind of changing mindsets when you're part of software development or development of any other service or product. It's not something that's set in stone, that kind of evolves with needs, with changing circumstances. We've seen that over the past 40 years, how things change. So we have to be very transparent about it. What we have learned as well is collecting data and measuring impact of what we're doing. And it's also really important to kind of set the KPIs at the beginning, like what do you want to measure? Is it money saved? Is it people making things faster? Is it, I don't know, for example, with our tax pilot, where we launched a service to pay your tax for property really, really fast. The KPI for us was how fast people paid and also how happy they were to pay their tax, because no one's happy to pay their taxes. But we had Net Promoter Score of 90, which is through the roof. We didn't really believe that, but that was a lot of people happy to pay their taxes. And I had people messaging me like, I did it on waiting on the lights when I was in my car, and I'm like, please don't tell me that. So, there was procurement mentioned as well. So that's kind of a challenge in a public institution, also kind of setting up the rules that you can open up to smaller companies and not delivering, it's called, I'm not sure how it's called in English, but it's a software as it is, yellow. I'm not sure if you know what I mean. So it's more about a piece of work rather than working with your partner as a collaborator or with your service. And one last thing I wanted to mention, which was really good for us. So we started a city hackathon called Climathon, and we had lots of different people contributing, and we're starting through pandemic. So the first one was fully online, and we had people coming to us and trying to solve our challenges, and we are still working with the teams from the first year. So these are kind of our volunteers that they keep coming back to the city, and it builds a relationship for the city as well, even though it's much harder to kind of work with the broader ecosystem.
Thank you very much. I maybe do one more challenge, because what we experience is sometimes people like to start projects. Maybe it's not open source specifically, but people like to start projects, and the finishing is the hard part. So that's what we dealt a lot with. Also, back to Jakub. What are some major cybersecurity challenges that governments face when collaborating on open source software and open content? Do you have any advice you can offer on how to overcome these challenges? What is your opinion maybe on the upcoming European Union legislation? And could you give some examples how to address this, or where to get inspiration from?
Thank you. As I know, there is no legal problem, as we said, when using or contributing to open source project as public sector in Czech Republic or from legislation of European Union. So that's okay. But the main problem, as I see in public sector in Czech Republic, is lack of knowledge, lack of experts in that field, because Czech public institution usually outsource all of the development, all of the expert work. So inside of that institution, there is nobody that can said that that software is good, that software is not good. They outsource that work. And when you the problem with open source, as we talked about it in previous panel, in procurement, according to some lawyers in Czech Republic, they said it's not possible to request the external company to deliver you open source software. You cannot put requirements, deliver the code must be open source, because they said this is discrimination. So if everything is outsourced and you cannot request open source, it's a problem. So, and you don't have internal people that can develop software. So, but one public institution, one city, maybe 2 years ago, they want to, because they some external entity code one application for making grants, and the city wanted to release that code for other cities so they can use that. And with cooperation with Open Cities and that city, we receive that code and check it before they release it for public. And we find out that there are many security vulnerabilities. So if the city released that code, I think their system will be hacked in 1 or 2 minutes, because there was a really basic security problems. So the security is really important because if you have closed source, the vulnerabilities are there, but nobody. It can be harder to find them. If you have code, it's much easier for potential hackers to find the vulnerabilities, and they can report to you or use and get the money from you, for example, from ransomware. So that's the reason why I said in the first part of my presentation that the bug bounty are one of the solution for that. And another solution is you need expert knowledge inside the organization and check if the code is okay and it's releasable for anybody, for public. And to make it this thing easier, our agency release a recommendation for public sector that they can use, not just that they can use when they want to release their products as open source. Currently, it's available just in Czech language, and it's available on our GitHub. But we plan to translate that recommendations to English in the near future, and the organizations can use that for not just to check the code according to the rules, but they also can provide recommendations to their external partners, so they will follow the rules by themselves.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the cybersecurity question is a big one, and we need more people who are able to help with it. So, yeah, hopefully, with your help, we will make this better. So, Karel, you have experience from different types of projects, both commercial and non-profit. So what do you think the biggest advantages of the Czech environment are, and maybe do we have any projects we can export to the other states and build on them for further cooperation?
Yeah, thanks. I know we are short on time, so I'll keep it short. When the projects would be in the context of public or government services, I'm afraid it's the other way around. We don't have much to teach anybody. And this is paradoxical, right? It's, again, ironic. Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, it's really historically a technically advanced country. There's a lot of technological innovation happening here. There are many successful technological companies. As Jakub usually says, e-commerce in Czech Republic is really, a high standard for everybody. But when it comes to the public sector services, public sector applications, that's, just a disgrace. We had a good go a couple of years ago, for instance, the data boxes, datové schránky. That was a semi-successful project at that time, but when you think about it, it's a glorified file sharing system, with notifications. It's crazy, it's for sharing PDFs, right? So that's the paradox, For instance, in Greece, which I don't think anybody here would describe as a historically, technically advanced country, I'm not talking about 2000 years ago, right? Like the last century, they had a pretty sophisticated system for tracking lockdowns, etc., etc. Maybe we were lucky we had no such application, so you could do whatever you want here, but the point stands. So another good example, which is kind of ironic or paradoxical, is Bank ID, And I always say Bank ID, that's an absolute success and an absolute failure. For some of the maybe foreigners who don't know what Bank ID is, it's a way how you can authenticate to government services online through your bank account, because obviously the bank knows who you are, right? So we had some half-baked solutions for that here provided by government, but the usability is so, crazy that actually the local banks, they formed a conglomerate of banks and did this service for everybody to use, which you can say that's a huge success, but also the state should probably provide a service like this in the same way, in the same usable way, right? So On the other hand, to end on a happy note, I think that is maybe something to explore, to not be afraid of cooperation with the commercial or business sector, because this is a really great solution. Like everybody who uses BankID in this country, they're like, this is great, I love it. I will never ever use anything, else again. So maybe that's one thing where we can share some success here.
Yeah, thank you for the positive ending. Yeah, the BankID is the thing we could show up to other people. And so we are nearly at the end of our panel. So my last question is to Jiří. And so we are in the middle of European presidency of European Council. Czech presidency of European Council. So do you see something we can do to encourage the connection between the EU, the member states, and the Czech Republic? Do you see anything that is the Czech to do it?
Well, thank you. Obviously, presidency is a very short time frame. It is half a year. This is not a time to achieve significant, but to start things. Yeah? This is good timing and good place to start to timing. As you ask for what is unique, this is difficult to answer. I would maybe say that we are the best country, best place to host the conferences from various reasons. First, we are in the middle of Europe. Second, that we here in Brno, we have an airport with no flights, which is also unique. And we have the best beer, wine, and spirits together. Yeah? This is a paradise, obviously. Yeah? But on the more serious note, our country is, let's say, IT heavy. We have really maybe one of the largest number of IT specialist coders compared to population in Europe from some historical reasons. I really mean that. Yeah? And we have a lot of great team, a lot of great companies. There are areas that we are, I would not say that we are the best, but we are strong. Yeah? Which is, I would like to point out the AI and big data. Yeah? We have great teams and great companies, great competencies in these two areas. And you know that in public sector, this is all about the great data. We have a lot of data. We have no smart tools to analyze, to have some outcomes from all politician decisioning. Yeah. This is something we need, but we have something to offer. And we are also very strong in cybersecurity, as actually you mentioned. Yeah, we have, again, could say that we are one of the strongholds of security, cybersecurity. Not as good as Israeli guys, but they are keeping it secret. So we are willing to share a little more. We have also some nice organization here. Maybe this is not unique, but it is a nice contribution, like Česko Digital, like Otevřená města, like is Open Art, that are contributing. We have great university, as we are on the premises here, that are very strong in open software. The Faculty of Informatics is a stronghold of open software. I have another funny story to say, but not here, not now. So those are things that we can contribute. Maybe not unique, but we are strong in there.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the closing note. And this is the end of our panel. I thank all the panelists for the insights and expertise. I think it was a great panel. So please, big round of applause for the panelists. Thank you very much. And I think we have some more instructions to make.
Absolutely. Okay. I'll keep with mine. Thank you again to all our panelists of today and all the one prior to that. It has been really a pleasure to listen to all of you. And I hope our audience here in Brno, but also online, has appreciated the high quality of the interventions and the discussions between them. As a last remark, I would like again to thank also all the organizers of today's event and the numerous persons that have worked for months to make it happen today. It has been a huge work, and I'm really, really, really proud of all of us. It was an amazing effort. Seeing how open source is a strategic digital policy driver at national and EU level, and the commitment of our speakers and our audience as well to its value and utility for the grand digitization challenges lying ahead. It has been a pleasure to share the scene with you today. I would also like to thank all our attendants for their presence, their interests, and it shows the importance of these topics on the political scene today.
Okay, thank you for the thank you. So I also like to thank everyone for amazing first part of today's conference. I would also like to thank our speakers who have been amazing, and I'm really glad that they share their insights and their wisdom with us. And I'm sure that these foundations we have laid here today will be great stepping stones for the development of the EU-level open source cooperations, and also to the future Czech Open Source Program Office. So this will definitely require some further close cooperation on the EU level and within the organizations and Czech government, and also involve non-profits. Also some businesses, maybe universities, and also all the people who are interested in developing this with us. And we will discuss these next steps in the afternoon expert discussion. So thank you very much, and see you in the afternoon.
Yeah, so before letting you all go and enjoy the lunch, which will, by the way, happen also in the courtyard, just like the coffee break, for your information, just a quick word about this afternoon discussion on action plans to establish the Czech National OSPO for Public Administration. It will be facilitated by Jacob Green from the OSPO++ network, and as well Jiří, and I'm very sorry about the pronunciation of your last name, but Marek, I guess. And just a quick word, the OSPO++ network is a global network and community of collaborative open source program offices. They focus on supporting the commission objectives of universities, government, and civic institutions. And they have a great experience supporting the setting up of OSPOs, and they foster collaboration between them and build a co-collaboration infrastructures for today's challenges. Yeah, I hope you will all join us this afternoon for this as well. And I wish you all a great lunch. And as for our speakers of today, I'll invite you to follow Jiří to outside also for a quick group picture. And yeah, that's all. Thank you all very much for your attention, and yeah, enjoy the lunch.